Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this rainy day. My name's Christine Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Seedleaf. And today we'll be going over composting for the next 2 hours. The bulk of it, we'll be talking about hot composting, and that's up at the front. And then at the tail end, we'll talk a little bit about vermiculture, just because that's quite straightforward. And then Seth here will then go over how to use your vouchers and have any, if you have any questions to the city about, composting bins, anything. He'll answer that, and then we will dispatch for the day. So that's the general run of the program. In the middle, and I hope it'll be probably an hour and 15 in, you'll be allowed to use the bathroom, get snacks, and we will pop outside to look at the different bins that we have on site. So there's 3 that you all can look at. I believe your voucher allows you to buy 2 of them, or helps you toward buying 2 of them. So yes, does that sound good? Okay, great. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Seedleaf first before we begin. So Seedleaf is a community gardening organization in town that began in 2007. We are now 16 years old, and the reason why the city has come to Seedleaf to help with the composting program that they're doing is that we used to be partners in picking up compost around the city. So there was a pilot project actually in Lexington to see about the viability of a compost collection service. And Seedleaf collected from over 30 cafes and restaurants and about 60 households. And that came to an end in 2020, not only because of the pandemic, but because it was physically demanding. Quite literally, my back couldn't take it anymore. And so we stopped that program, and we've switched toward making sure that you all can compost at home. That's far more effective in lieu of having a citywide municipal project, and you can donate the compost that you get to neighbors or to other community organizations if you don't need to use it yourself. It also helps to keep waste out of our landfills. So that's why we were drawn on to do this series. I'll be doing this throughout the month of March. I don't know if there's still space in classes, Seth?
I think there are only a few left for those who don't receive city waste collection.
Okay.
So if you know anybody that falls into that category, please encourage them to sign up. But
yes.
Yeah, we're full for the rest of the time.
Awesome.
We do have a wait list open right now, so if you do know anybody that would like to be put on that wait list, you can encourage them to do so. We do often have some folks drop out, even today, things like the weather and other things like that. It just happens, but there's always maybe a spot or 2. So
yeah,
wait list is open. We're taking people on it still. So
yeah. And your friends will see my face until the end of March, and then there's 2 additional classes at the North Side branch. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
We'll have one more here next week, and then on March 16th and on March 24th, we'll have 2 more workshops. 16th will still feature you, but the 24th we'll have our very own Dawn from our education team joining us to kind of help out with that day. So
awesome. Okay, well, this is how this is going to work. Seth is like the computer dude, and he's going to be flipping that as I'm talking. You guys have a copy, exactly what he has up there in your hands. I might be flipping back and forth, so don't get too wetted from going from front to back. And here we go. So I'll also point out these really quickly. These are samples that I brought from my home composting unit, one of leaf mold, which is here, and one of from my compost bin, my hot compost bin unit. So when we take a break, you guys are invited to come up and touch this stuff and smell it and go through. All right, so, oops, did we already do that one?
yeah, we kind of
Okay. Awesome. So composting, what is it and why do you do it? I begin all of these with saying that things are decomposing all the time, all around us. We are all going to die. As we age, we're slowly moving toward becoming dirt, which is a good thing. That's a really, really good thing. But the act of composting is where you, as an individual, are actively managing that decomposition process. And so if you take a banana peel, if you even take a meat or a fish and you just chuck it out into your backyard, it will eventually break down. It won't break down in the way that you might like. It might attract critters. It might smell really bad and lead to like a sort of slimy sludge, but it will break down. That's totally fine. I'm sure some of you already have a slimy sludge in your backyard if you've kind of tried composting so far and have not succeeded. I see you covering your face. Yes. But with managing your compost properly, you can cut down on the smell significantly to where it doesn't bother you. You can cut down on critters going into your pile and attacking, say, your vegetable garden. And relatively quickly, you can get a product that you can use as a garden amendment, a garden, lawn, soil amendment for your house. And so composting is great. But that's what makes it specifically different from just regular schmegular decomposition that's happening all the time. And what we'll be talking about today is hot composting. So you might have heard the differentiation between these two terms before. Cold composting is exactly sort of just what I described, where you have a pile out back and you're sort of adding things to it slowly. For best practice, you're not adding meat, fish, or dairy, but it's all of your garden scraps, your kitchen vegetable scraps, you're putting it in a pile, and really within a year and a half, you should have a good chunk of that, which is broken down into something that you can use. But it takes a very long time. If you are an avid gardener, if you have a huge garden, if you don't have the money to go and buy fertilizer or other things to help boost plant growth, and you want something fast, then hot composting is the way to go, and that's what we'll be talking about today. And so I already know that you're in trouble, but I just want to see other people in here. How's your composting going? If you've tried it before, if you've been successful, if you're an experienced composter, just share really briefly some of your composting stories.
We just started composting this last winter and just collecting eggshells, banana peels, and coffee grounds.
Okay.
And we have a raised bed, a little 4x4 raised bed garden that we started last year.
Uh-huh.
And so during the winter, we're collecting into one of those buckets. And then I've been each month throwing it out on the soil and turning it over. And
Okay.
it seems to be working pretty well.
Okay, nice. Nice. Someone over here?
I've composted in years past. I haven't, probably in the last 8 years or so, but the container I used was just cumbersome.
Yeah.
Try to get in and turn it, because I know you need to turn it.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I just found that, well, that's just too much work. So
Yeah.
I felt like it wasn't worth what I was trying to put into it for the little bit I was getting out of it.
Okay.
I needed to try a different setup, which I haven't yet, but I'm willing to hear about it.
Okay, cool. Yes?
Yeah, I compost directly into my garden. I rotate the space.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
literally dump it directly into a hole.
Yeah.
It's thriving, lots of worms.
Yeah. And that's a perfectly good method. Some people will call that trench composting, where you just dig it in. Some people use a rototiller to cut it up as they dig it in.
And it goes quick.
Yeah.
It composes very quick.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So we do have some experienced composters in the room. Anyone else who has some trouble with composting?
I have a real problem with critters getting into my compost. I mean, they have eaten and destroyed like 3 different composters now. You know,
Wow. They've destroyed the actual structure.
outside of it, yeah.
Okay, and what was your structure?
It was it was a stationary bin,
Okay.
but evidently it's too flimsy.
Okay.
I mean, I live in a subdivision where people do throw food out in their yards, so there's lots and lots and lots of possums and squirrels and chipmunks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of them have visited my composter.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, is your composter plastic or wood or metal?
Plastic.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's a first. I've not heard of critters eating the composter, but okay, we'll talk about that. Yes.
My problem is finding enough brown.
Yes. We'll come back to that, Mary. Her problem is finding enough brown material, which is pretty crucial.
My problem is finding enough green.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
I think some of the recommended ratios that you read online are not accurate.
So the solution to getting enough food is having your neighbors contribute their kitchen scraps instead of putting them in the trash.
I'm going to say that Mary is kind of like a plant in the class. Because she has a compost bin that I've come and looked at. And so she has some pretty good recommendations that she'll be chiming out with as we go along. But she's absolutely right. A very easy solution to whether you're getting enough compost, whether you have enough to put into it, whether you're getting enough browns or greens, is really at first looking at the resources directly around you, which are going to be your neighbors. Oftentimes. So like Mary said, being able to knock next door and one, get to know the people who live around you. If you don't, you should. But also saying, hey, if you're throwing this out, do you mind just contributing it to, my yard? Giving them access to wherever your bin is so they can add that to what you have, or just giving them a bucket so they can carry it over and just leave it on your porch if you don't want them going to where your bin is to add. And that can help boost up the amount of compost that you're working with and help you with some of those supply problems. So yes, relying on your neighbors is a really, really good idea. But yeah, we're going to get into the not enough browns, the weird ratios. We'll try to help with the composter chew down situation. All right, so composting versus using fertilizers. Why do we recommend it? I think one of the mantras from this class that I go over and over and say a lot is that anything worth having takes work and it takes time, right? You're going to go to the store and there's going to be an array of various fertilizers that have an array of different benefits. And I'm not knocking it. Those are totally fine. I have indoor houseplants. I need to go to the store and buy fertilizer to feed them indoors because I don't want to really bring the compost from outside in. It's full of bugs, and I don't want them running around at home. Fertilizer is totally okay when you need it to rectify really serious soil issues, like severe lack of nitrogen. Go and get blood meal, or whatever is recommended by your local extension county office. That is totally fine. However, for the bulk of us here in Fayette County, what you're going to see most often when you bring in your soil to be tested with the county agent, which all of you should do, it's only $10 and very easy, is that you just need nitrogen, right? That's what it says all the time. And if you go for bigger analyses, they'll look at some nutrient deficiencies in your soil, right? A lack of copper or a zinc or other little nutrients that you don't need quite as much as nitrogen or potassium or phosphorus. Composting provides everything your garden needs, and it does it in a way that's efficient. So when you go and get fertilizer from the garden store, it's like giving your garden cocaine. It's really great. It feels really good. Things are bursting forth really rapidly, but it's a lot. And your garden can absorb all of that fertilizer when you put it in. And there's usually, I guess Scott's has come out with products that are slow release. But usually what happens is that those chemicals, that fertilizer, washes off into our water systems. So what you see are algal blooms and other issues in the surrounding environment from using too much fertilizer. And often what we see in gardens that use too much fertilizer is that you burn your plants because no one ever reads the instructions, right? Those fertilizers come with really specific instructions, and if you don't use it the way that it's been intended by the manufacturer, you can really mess up your garden or the beautiful plant that you were trying to help. So the pros of compost: one is that it gives your garden really not only the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus that you're always hearing about when you're looking at different fertilizer amounts, the nitrogen, the NPK on your fertilizer bags, but it's also giving you micronutrients that those manufactured fertilizers don't have. And your soil has the time to take in those nutrients, unlike with fertilizers where it's really just a rapid rush into the soil and through the plant system, if it even gets that far. I should also note that recurring use of fertilizers does weaken your soil structure. So compost is lovely in that you are not only adding to your garden for your own immediate benefit, but you are building soil structure by adding organic material to it. So over years of using compost, we can see we have crumblier soil that has more pockets of oxygen, something that is crucial for plant growth. Sometimes when you're walking on soil that has loads of compost from years of working in, it's fluffier, it's darker, it's bouncier, and you see loads of insect life in that stuff, which means it's a good substrate for your plants. And there's pesticides such as 7-Dest, which are really popular, and they knock out basically all bug life from your soil. And people will think that's great. There will be no bugs to torture my tomatoes or whatnot. And in actual fact, it is dreadful. You have bad soil, you have dead soil when you cannot see insects in it, right? When you're using chemicals that make it inhabitable for a diverse range of bacterial and insect life. So that's something to keep in mind as you go forward, that you can get quite easily from a store, but it could do irreparable damage that will take a long time to fix. So compost builds soil, helps bring insects in, brings micronutrients, and gives you all the major nutrients you need for successful plant health.
But would it also feed the weeds?
It will feed the weeds. But okay, here's the thing though, weeds aren't bad, weeds are just plants out of place, one. And two, a really cool thing that you can do with weeds. You would never add weeds to your compost bin, especially when it's flowering out or in seed. You want to put that in either your yard waste, into your yard waste, which is, yes, you might be transplanting it elsewhere, or you can get a big old bucket, a old bucket that you're not using, and you could put your weeds in there with water, and you can make a lovely compost tea. And an easy compost tea is putting your weeds in water, covering it up with a lid or something that you're not using that covers the surface, and wait until it stinks. And I mean, when it really, really stinks, like stinks to where you think you will faint, that's when it's ready, and you can dilute that with water and add it back into your garden. And at that point, the seeds have totally, again, when it stinks, that's when your seeds are like totally broken down, and you can use that again. You can bury it if you want, and that makes a lovely compost tea. So weeds, if you have nettles, if you have comfrey, which Seedleaf has all over our different garden spots, it makes a lovely compost tea. So in addition to what we're going to talk about, there's other forms of making compost. So that's how you could use your weeds, but don't add your weeds to your compost bin. But yes, compost will feed weeds too. So, okay, compost first using those yard waste bins or yard waste bags that the city gives you. So waste around the world globally is a pretty big deal. Simply, governments don't have the means to collect efficiently all of the waste that humans create, right? In Lexington, we have a pretty good system, but this system is not one that can handle a composting unit. It's quite expensive, and to do it on a municipal scale, you need really pricey equipment. The city tried to see what a home pickup service could look like. Seth can give you more information on why that didn't pan out. But in bigger cities, they are trying it, but it's still in many places in trial phases. Do you want to add anything to that, Seth?
Yeah, really the whole big thing here, like we kind of talked about, is getting everybody involved in home composting. Like we said, we've tried in the past before to kind of see what municipal composting would look like. And like mentioned, it's very, very expensive to actually have the equipment set up and ready to take in that amount of waste. And another big thing is similar to our recycling program, it's all about participation and contamination. So when we've tried that in the past, participation wasn't necessarily incredibly high. Not every home on a route was participating, and contamination is a huge issue. Even now, we spend a lot of time sorting and cleaning our recycling material to make sure that it can be recycled when we send it for recycling from the municipal facility. Compost, it's a lot harder to clean of that contamination, and so it can cause a huge issue down the line. Even things that people think are compostable sometimes end up in there. And so it's a lot easier and a lot more cost effective to teach you all how to do it correctly at home. So
Yeah.
that's why we've kind of come to this conclusion.
Yeah. So trash is a cultural issue, right? People have been trained in the US context to simply throw it into their garbage bin, whatever it is, whether it's recyclable, whether it isn't, whether it's food scrap, it just all goes into one place. In other countries and cultures, well, I can think Korea, South Korea, you pay for your trash. And if you go over, you pay excess for that, right? And they have to sort out their vegetables from everything else. They want to, because it means the weight of their trash is less and that they'll pay less. So there are different cultures behind trash, and we in the US have a particular culture of wanting the ease and freedom to dump everything and anything into one thing and have it be moved away from our site. That can't happen here. In addition, in the fall, we have a big problem where all the leaves drop. And in Kentucky, well, in the US, but specifically in Lexington, people love lawns. And they love green, emerald green, perfect lawns. And leaves sort of blanket that, right? It can kind of destroy that perfect green lawn. And what the city was doing for a long time, if you all remember, is that when you raked your leaves to the edge of your lawn in a nice sort of wind pile or row, the city would come around with a hoover, essentially, and hoover it all up into these big trucks. And that, too, is pretty expensive, and the city had to stop with that program. And so there's yard waste bags, that the city does provide vouchers for. But even that is ridiculous, because your leaves are actually quite wonderful as another garden amendment. It's not as nutrient dense as compost is, but it has a lot of micronutrients. And I mean, that leaf mold is responsible for helping a lot of our forests, all of our forests grow. If you look out the window, leaf mold, which isn't really, nutrient dense, has grown big old trees that give you acorns, pawpaws, and the like throughout Kentucky. So leaf mold is something that's really easy to make. So instead of raking all your leaves to the edge of your lawn, what you want to do in your backyard, if you have the space, is just create, with chicken wire, a small circle where you fill in that circle with, this chicken wire with leaves. And if you have a mulching mower, but I use a weed whacker. I just stick my weed whacker in it, just like a blender, and tear it up. Yes. And that's it. And then you just leave it there to break down. And what you'll get, you don't want to see, I can pass this around, you don't want to see, the whole leaf. You have whole leaf in here because that was what's still on top. But you want to see more of the crumbly stuff that you see on the bottom of that. It breaks down, it gets really dark and lovely and rich, it's not smelly, it has little critters that are happy living in between the different leaves, and that's what you can add ultimately to your garden. If you don't want to wait until it gets to that spot, which is fairly quickly, you can use the leaves in springtime to mulch, your garden that's popped back up. That's totally fine too, as a mulch. If you have a garden where you're growing flowers and different things that are going to pop up in springtime, you can't really leave it laying down on your lawn. You will have to move it. In other cases, if you don't mind what pops up or what doesn't pop up, you can leave the leaves on your lawn. That's totally fine. However, I do know there's a concern with people who have mobility issues with leaving leaves on the ground because it does get slick and it does present a slipping hazard. Again, this is a really great way to reach out to your neighbors and see if there's a little kid who will come and just move leaves off of your sidewalk. Again, turning to your resources to see what is helpful. And if you're still able-bodied yourself, moving your leaves out of your walkway and putting them into a container where they can become leaf mold is really great. If you want the process of leaf mold to speed up, it takes about a year for it to start to look like that. You can put it in a plastic bag. So collect your leaves into a black plastic bag, poke it with holes, water it a little bit so it's nice and damp, and then close it up and forget about it for 6 months. And then after about 6 months, you should have something that you can use on your garden. So leaf mold is magical. Pardon?
Just leaves, but no branches.
Sometimes small branches are fine. If you have like big ones, then no, you would take that out. But small branches are okay.
It would decompose or it would be dry?
It will ultimately, for a while though, longer than the leaves, you'll still see little sticks. But that's okay in soil.
So like right now, we still have like a lot of weeds in our backyard. So what are you recommending that we would do with those?
Yep, so you would gather up your leaves first. Two, depending on how fast you want it, you can put it within some kind of rough enclosure. So chicken wire sort of hooked into a circle is one thing. If you do have a kind of compost bin, you can put it in there. If you have a weed whacker, I would recommend sticking it in there just to mash or cut those leaves up. And what you're doing when you cut things into smaller bits is that you're increasing the surface area for bacteria to work on, so breaking it down faster. And so you can leave it. You can also skip the weed whacking process if you don't mind how long it takes to break down. Just put it in there, and you'll see by springtime, it'll lose half of its volume, right? It's squishing, insects are eating it. If you want it faster, you can gather those leaves up, step one, sort of cut them down with a, what did you call it? Mulching mower, and then put it into a black plastic bag that has holes in it. So you just poke holes in it with a screwdriver. You wet it with your hose, you close it up, and you forget about it. And then in about 6 or 7 months, you should have stuff that's ready to go and to be mixed into your garden or into your compost bin.
Okay. But it's okay as far as like not, weeds wouldn't grow, or they might.
They might,
Okay.
but it's okay. Yeah. Don't be afraid of weeds. If there were no weeds, I mean, what would you do as a gardener? Yeah. So composting is great. I also should mention that with compost, we help to keep things out of our landfill. So climate change is a really big issue that we're facing, and we know that in our landfills, according to the EPA, 24% of our landfills are food waste. That breaking down in what is most likely anaerobic environment, so without oxygen, releases CO2 gases, principally methane, into the atmosphere. So one of the things that you can really help in our fight against climate change is to think about composting at home, to keeping that stuff out of the landfill and actively managing your bin by conducting hot composting. It's also great. Oh, yes.
So if I stick a landfill on compost or put it in the trash, isn't the same amount of CO2 and methane relation that landfill? How does that, why is that different?
That's a good question. I suppose when you're keeping it in your backyard as opposed to sending it to a landfill, you are preventing a massive waste from gathering in one space and becoming kind of...
It'll still go in the air, either way.
But,
It's a different process.
yeah, I mean, in your...
That's what I'm asking. Is
Yeah.
the landfill substantially different, so you have less CO2 and methane from compost,
Yeah.
as opposed to that same amount of material going into a landfill? So it is a substantially different process.
So without management, what happens is that you have, because it's an anaerobic breakdown, so there's no oxygen, it's creating sort of a gassy sort of mix. So you're having methane, I think ammonia as well, different CO2 gases, and sometimes when you drive past a landfill, you get that smell, right? That is what's happening when you have this breakdown happen, but you also get explosions where it gets at sometimes flare-ups, where sometimes trash catches on fire, right? So what's happening in your compost bin is that you're there watching it, adding carbon to it, turning it, introducing oxygen to prevent sort of the buildup of those gases. And then you...
So it's dispersed
Yeah.
instead of concentrated, and concentration in landfill ignite fires, ignite like other plastics or other stuff on fire, and put that stuff in there.
Yeah. Oh, but Mary has a contribution.
Also, methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas. So when the carbon is released as CO2, it's more benign, actually, than when that same amount of carbon is released as methane. So when you're preventing the carbon release as methane, you're doing a huge positive thing for climate change. And then I think the other thing about compost is that, when you're composting, it doesn't disappear completely, right? That's because the stuff stuff you're able to put in your garden, that has a lot of carbon in it. And that carbon is in a slow form of carbon, so it's actually building carbon in your soil in a way that it can't do when you put it in the
So, in addition to reducing your waste, think about what you bring into your home every week. And I think we all do it. We go to the grocery store and we buy way too much. We buy more than what we'll need. I will say that Environmental Services made sure I put this in, but it's very important, which is that we need to cut down before we get to the compost bin on our consumption practices. If you find that you're going to the store often and having things that you're just throwing away without eating it, think about making a grocery list. Changing how you consume mitigates this problem of waste to begin with. Composting is great, but it would be better if you just ate it. Don't go through this whole process, right? Just eat what you have. You're gonna poop it out, which is also a kind of compost, but it's a lot better, right? So thinking about loving leftovers. If you don't love leftovers, I don't know what's wrong with you. Love your leftovers, eat them, package them up, bring them for lunch the next day, share with friends, share with neighbors, have potlucks, but try to avoid this issue of waste. Now, if you do have some waste left over in addition to your scraps, that uneaten apple or the lettuce that went bad, then composting is a great way of sort of processing that waste. Okay, so what's happening in your bin? And at this point, I'm going to talk a little bit about some different composting units, just in case you don't have a big backyard, just in case you're not producing enough as a single person, and you might not have neighbors who are very close to you if you're living in a rural area. So what are some other options that you can look at? One that's really, really, really cool, and I suggest that you go onto YouTube and check it out. It's called, they're called black soldier fly. And they're really great in that a lot of people eat meat and fish and dairy, and they need a way to break that down. In the hot composting system that I'm going to talk about today, those things are excluded, but those things are also coming out of your kitchens if those are things that you eat. So black soldier fly, their larvae, within just the span of sometimes hours, can sort of break all of that stuff down to the bone. It's like a little horror story that happens in your backyard and watching them. So they sort of latch on to the meat or whatever you've put in there, the animal product that you've put in, and they clean through it very quickly. And so it's great if you have little kids who are not yet too old to be too cool for gross stuff like that to watch. It's also for big adult children, it's really great fun to check out. The second thing is bokashi. It is a Japanese system of composting where essentially you're pickling your waste before putting it outside. So it's sold in kits. You can get a bucket. It comes with inoculant, and it has a kind of bacteria that you sprinkle on each time that you put waste in. And the best I can do to describe it is that it smells like pickles. So you're getting this pickly scent that is invading your home, so that's unpleasant, but you get a compost tea out of it. The caveat with that tea is that you can't apply it directly to your plants. It's very acidic, so you would need to dilute it considerably, or you can just pour it outside. Once the bokashi unit is done sort of pickling your produce, you would then put it out into your compost bin or bury it for it to be done, to finish. And so similar to the people who are already kind of burying their food waste outside, this is another system that you can use that ferments your food waste and then finishes up with its breakdown outside. Vermiculture we're going to talk about, so I'm going to put that on hold. I will also alert all of you to, if you're on Instagram or social media or just cruising the internet, I swear those things listen to you when you're talking. So now that you've been in a composting workshop, you might start getting ads later on for composting. And there are some units called Lomi, Zera, or Taro. And I've seen these, and they're basically all versions of a device that macerates your food waste. It seems to be able to dry it and then serve it back out to you as kind of like crumbly soil-like ingredients. I don't put much stock in those because it's basically, it's it's blending your food waste without any of the sort of decomposition process, right? You could essentially do that by putting your food waste in a dehydrator and then blending it all up. And so I think for the sake of getting something that is nutrient rich, which adds sort of insect life to your soil, which adds more beneficial material to your plants, I would avoid those. Again, anything fast and easy isn't worth having. Things take time and work. And finally, with Humanure, some of you might be interested in exploring compost toilets. In Fayette County, you cannot have a compost toilet, unfortunately. But if you live outside of Fayette County, perhaps you can try it. It's another great way. Your own poop is essentially what Humanure is. You put it in a container or in a part of your area and you let it break down for a period of time, and that is good material that you can use on your plants if you wish. And so there's lots of composting toilets on the market. It's become really popular to try. I should also say that urea from urine, human urine, is also becoming a really big deal for farmers. And some people have units that go around collecting urine waste from different families so that they can use it in their agricultural operations. So it's really cool. Again, not allowed in Fayette County. So go outside of Fayette County if you would like to try Humanure out. Okay, so the cast of characters that you will see in a compost bin. So you're taking in from your kitchen food scraps. Like humans, everything is covered in bacteria. So there's bacteria already working on us, already working on the vegetable as it's still in your kitchen, right? When it goes out and it gets into that bin, there's the first release of nitrogen, right, that's happening in there, but it's still not quite hot yet when it hits that bin. And you see, let's see, this is from my bin. You can look around and you'll see all kinds of little creepy crawlies just latch in to that bin. So you're seeing centipedes, you're seeing worms, you're seeing mites, you're seeing pill bugs, loads of pill bugs roaming around. You know, if you see a roach or two, don't freak out, right? They have their place in the world, as long as it's in the compost bin. But you're seeing things that are quite comfortable, and that's because it hasn't gotten hot enough yet. It's still in the mesophilic stage of composting, where you're well below 90 degrees, perhaps below 70 degrees. Things are still comfortable in there. There's lots of food still for those critters to eat. But as those critters start to eat, right, and the bacteria that was there that never went anywhere starts to sort of keep producing and eating, things start to heat up. And so those first characters that you see begin to disappear because it gets uncomfortable, and it really gets turned over to various forms of bacteria to continue to work on the food in your bin. So you'll see actinocinamites working. Well, you won't see them. They're naked to the eye, but they're in there working along with an array of different bacterial species, sort of just eating and munching and reproducing and getting things really, really hot. Let's go back. I will say that some of the things that you will see on woody material will be different. So woody material is broken down largely by fungi, and you'll often find in old stumps as well, beetles. You bust those open, you'll see like these huge black beetles walk out. And so those are some of the things that you might see in more woody material if you have a mulch pile. In a mulch pile, it's a really great way to see those sort of white thread-like structures called mycelium in them. So that's how woody structures over time begin to decompose. We'll go to the next one. All I will say here about rotifers, because I mention it each time we do this, is because there's now a lot more research going into these critters, and they're really cool to watch. They're in our soil, specifically in our compost bins, and they have heads that look like little scrubbies, And they rotate like this as they move and slide through your bin. Again, they're naked to your eye, but they're so cool, and there's so much work being done into how they benefit our soil. So I recommend just going to YouTube, looking up rotifers, and enjoying seeing them scrub across your screen, because it's really neat. So those are the things to look for initially in your compost bin. Those creepy crawlies, the centipedes, millipedes, mites, roly-polies, flies even, earthworms that are going to be in your bin. And then there's going to be a period when they seem to disappear. This is really important because I find that people have trouble with knowing how to manage their compost bins because they don't know what they should be looking for. And you're going to really need to be using your sense of smell, your sense of touch, and your eyesight to know what's going on from moment to moment or from month to month in your bin. So that first round, you're smelling still your wood chips or your sawdust. You're probably still getting a little bit of a whiff of your banana peel, right? But you're seeing flies, you're seeing the pill bugs. You're not seeing too much of your garden scraps because you've done a really good job of covering it with browns, which we'll get into. So up here, there's this language of browns and greens, which you've seen before. And that's really referring to nitrogen and carbon. Now, we're organic beings. We're putting organic materials into the compost bin that all has carbon in it, right? So it's not like there's a carbon exclusive ingredient and a nitrogen exclusive ingredient. Rather, we're thinking in terms of ratios. And so grass clippings, after you mow, will be incredibly high in nitrogen. And once it's cut and you put it in your bin, it's losing that nitrogen over time. Carbon helps to speed that process up when you're mixing those two things together. But greens will be fruit, it will, anything nitrogen rich, leafy greens, grass clippings, coffee grounds, eggshells, plant stalks, everything, I guess the easiest way to think of it is whatever's coming out of your kitchen. Browns, on the other hand, are wood chips. It's brown paper bags. It's sawdust. If you're a woodworker and you are using wood that is untreated, it's perfectly fine to put the sawdust from that into your bin. Let's see, what else are we using? Pine fines is also something that is used. Just be aware that pine fines might make your compost a little bit more acidic. They're just from pine, when pine trees get ground up or macerated, or chipped. So yes. You can put pine needles in, right? So some of these things, just be aware of your source because it can impact the chemical composition of your pile. I know last week a woman asked about walnuts because it has a chemical called juglone, which is really cool. It helps walnut groves come into being because it prevents anything else from growing or many other things from growing. And so she asked, is it okay to put walnut wood chips in my bin? And in moderation, it's totally fine. I've not had a problem. We've not had a problem at Seed Leaf. It's only when you have something that is actively growing and that chemical doesn't dissipate, does it then become a problem. I wouldn't put loads of walnut leaves into my bin exclusively, but if you have small amounts, that is totally fine.
Simply about the newspaper and paper bag and cardboard. So I'm assuming with cardboard, you have to take all the tape off of the cardboard box. You got to take all that stuff off.
Yeah.
But what about the inks in the paper? So like, if you get the newspaper, you get the little glossy inserts. Mm-hmm. Can that go in there too? Or you can
No.
so what specifically of paper can go in and can't go in?
That's a good question. So you're exactly right. If it's glossy, it stays out. And so magazines don't go in your bin. If there's like a light sheen to it, don't put it in. It's really newspapers, black and white ink, so office paper is totally fine. Even things with a bit of pencil on it, even though it's lead, it's not that bad.
I have a shredder at home, and I put my shredding in there.
Yeah.
And it seems to be fine. So.
Yes, as long as it's office paper with basic black and white ink. If you've if you're shredding your credit card, right, you don't want that going in there. So avoiding plastics, right? Yeah.
So you can like shred up junk mail as long as it's not glossy.
Yeah. Yeah, on that plain, dull paper. Yep, that's totally fine. Yeah. Let's see, what else on that topic? Yes, paper bags from the grocery store are totally fine. Some of you might have trouble finding browns. I think that was what one person here said, that they're struggling with. And, you know, I've told people this, I've let people in on Seed Leaf secret, which is that we go and get a bunch of sawdust just from down the street there at Easy Wood Tools. They make lathes for woodworking, and they use untreated ash to make it. And then they put out huge sacks of sawdust behind their office buildings. And Monday through Friday before 5, I can drive back there and get huge bags of sawdust that we can apply. And it's really great. It makes everything go by so much faster. It makes your compost cook really, really quickly. And so that is a local source. You can also, and I've done this too, we're friends with lots of tree services, and they often have mulch that they can't, they often can't offload in Lexington. So they have to drive somewhere, either to Richmond or somewhere else to dump it. And if you could save them a trip from going that far, they would love to drop it off with you. So last week we heard of a service called, I'll get to you in a second, what was it? Oh my gosh, we forgot. Yes, it's an app name, but it's like, you know, take my, or give me your mulch.com, something like that, and they just dump it. Once they have it, they come without warning, so you have to have a clear driveway or somewhere for them to take it, but they will come and just dump it.
Truckloads only, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot.
You're gonna get a lot if you do.
Yeah, but you'll never have a problem with browns again. Yeah.
What about using old mulch, like in the spring, if you're gonna put new mulch down, maybe you're gonna rake up some of the old mulch that had been there for a few years? Can you use that old mulch over it? It may or may not, you know, have been dyed.
Oh, you don't want to use dyed mulch. If it's just old wood chips that are there and they're still sort of in their sort of woody form, that's perfectly fine. But stay away from dyed products going into your bins.
So like the bag mulch you might buy at the Lowe's or something?
Yeah, that are dyed red and all that, yeah.
You don't want to use that?
No.
I've also put in fabrics on a quilter, so I put in
Yes.
cotton and scraps.
That's really great. If you have old cotton t-shirts, right, or old cotton fabric, linen, that's natural material that you can put into your bin.
What was the name of the sawdust place that you were getting?
Oh, Easy Wood Tools. It's just down the street here.
What about ashes?
Ashes? Yes, if you're just burning wood, like regular wood that you've chopped down, that's totally fine. If you're getting wood that's been treated with fire starter, that's a no-no. Yes. Barbecue? I mean, yeah, if it's just naked wood with nothing sort of, it's, you know, when you go to the gas station or to the grocery store, sometimes you get wood that's specifically geared to start really quick. Well, it's laced with something, what is it like, what's in it? Gasoline?
Different things, but
Yeah.
there's usually a fire starter or some kind.
Yeah. So you don't want that. Yeah.
Did you say wood chips help to expedite the heating process?
Yeah, so really it starts to interact with that carbon and things get really hot really fast, and the nitrogen is often pulled out really quickly by carbon. It's only in turning, again, similar to stoking a fire, right? When you go and stoke a fire, you're poking at it and you're introducing oxygen. So it's like a chemical reaction happening in your compost bin, where nitrogen and carbon are interacting with each other, and when you add oxygen, you're just making it much hotter in your bin. So that's why turning your bin is really, really important.
So now it looks like you should have a brown pile and a green pile and periodically mix them. Because otherwise I don't know how you get 3 pots and 2 pots. You have to monitor your mix.
That's a problem.
Then you have to cover the green with the brown.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
So
you have 2 systems then.
Yeah, so you should have a pile of browns at hand. That will help you to always have enough brown when you need it, right? But in your bin, and it's okay to have 2 bins. In fact, it's recommended to have 2 bins to make this easier, with 1 bin being empty and 1 bin ultimately cooking, right? So in your empty bin, or empty-ish, you're actively adding things from your kitchen into it. And every time you add something, you're covering it with browns. So you can pull from your brown pile and layer on to the green that you've just added. And I've put this ratio here of 3 to 2, because if you go onto the internet, you'll see loads of different ratios that don't really make any sense. Once you become more adept at composting, you can do it by eye. But I know in doing these that most people struggle with not using enough brown, and that's usually where their problems come from, that they have a slimy, smelly mess is more often the case in something that is dry and no smell, which is too much carbon. So usually the problem is not enough carbon. So I just tell people, if you're one of those people who need to measure exactly as you're putting into your compost bin, just measure out 3 scoops for all of your green, and that will ensure that you have enough brown in your pile. And this helps the bulk of people, I think, with avoiding the errors that you often fall into, which is simply just not enough carbon going into your bin. And you know that you don't have enough carbon, and when you go and look at your bin, you can smell a funk. Like, it should smell like nothing. And if anything, it should kind of smell woody and sort of nice and scented with a little bit of what you've put in there. But if you've ever used an outhouse, right, and there's a bucket of sawdust next to it, when you're done using the outhouse and you put your sawdust in, you really don't smell much after that, right, because you've adequately added carbon on top of it. The same idea, if you're smelling something really stinky, you haven't added enough brown. So using that sense of nose. If you see the stuff that you added in, like you can see a lot of it and only a little patch of brown, that's where you should go and add more brown, right? If you don't see bugs on this, it's just becoming slimy, that's where you've gone wrong. So using your senses of sight and smell are really helpful. Once you get more comfortable with how your composting is going, right, you could probably get to the point where you're like, okay, I could probably ease up a little bit now on the greens, and that's totally fine. Once you see a nice sweet smell, you see bugs, and you see a little bit of warming activity begin to happen.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Are all these green stuff decomposed sooner or later? Because we read about, well, currently we only use coffee grind and eggshell and banana peel. And when we try to say, well, is the orange peel can go, and they recommend not to because it would take longer to decompose. So when we first started it, we thought maybe put those aside because they decompose differently.
So yes, things decompose at different rates. You're going to have eggshells for a really long time, so you'll have to like the appearance of eggshell in your garden. I do. With orange peels, and this comes up, people will say, we were told to leave those out of our bin. Those are absolutely compostable. They're fine. When my compost is done, like the compost bag that I sent around to you, that has loads of oranges, lemons, and limes in it, because I use them quite frequently to cook, and it breaks down just fine. It might take a little bit longer than, say, your carrot that's in the bin, but not exceptionally long. So you can add that into your bin. Now, adding citrus to your bin with worms, that's a no-no, and I'll talk about that. But in your hot composting bin, once things get cooking, it's really not a problem. And so I'll go to the next slide there and talk about what it means when things get cooking. So when I describe that stage where you see your worms, your pill bugs, your flies, your millipedes, I was describing the mesophilic stage, which gets you up to about 104 degrees. So the way that you can monitor temperature in your bin is by going and getting a compost thermometer from online. They're really easy to order. They look like meat thermometers, just with a much longer sort of gauge to measure. And you can find them. Did you pull up a photo? Oh, no. That's okay, that's okay. Again, it just looks like a meat thermometer. So it's a little circle dial up top and a long needle that you stick into your pile and measure it. And they're really inexpensive to get. And so that's another way that you can monitor. And if you're really into the science of it, you can begin to like make a journal. And you can see this bell curve happening where your pile goes from being really cold with all of these bugs to these bugs and insects starting to disappear and temperatures getting up in degrees. So when bacteria take over and they're the main actors, you're actively entering your thermophilic stage where things get really cooking. I have never been able to get up to 160. If I'm lucky, I could get up to 130, but I've never done 160 before. So you're doing great if you find yourself between 110 and 130. That means when you go to your pile and you sort of scoop back a little bit off the surface, you're feeling heat. Sometimes you might be even seeing steam. For example, when you look at mulch piles that are huge and massive with lots of leaves in them, they freshly come down and you move the top off and it steams up. That's what's happening. It's breaking down, and those leaves are kind of like the green material mixing with that carbon, and it's steaming. Ultimately, that steaming will stop unless you turn it. So this is where management of your pile comes in handy. But things will get pretty hot for a while until a lot of that nitrogen has been sort of like, that chemical reaction has sort of eaten up its food material that's come through.
Is it preferred to have your mulch pile where it gets direct sun, or does it matter?
That's a good question.
Temperatures, are these temperatures
Yeah.
vary throughout the year?
They sure are. So in the winter time, it is going to get cooler. It's still composting, but your temperatures won't get as high, right? Whereas in the summertime, it will. So you should locate your compost bin in a site, if you can, that's sunny to make it go a little bit faster. But all the same, everything will continue cooking. It'll just cook at lower temperatures if it's, in a shady spot during wintertime. That's a good question.
So do you still want to turn it or
Yes.
it's hot? Okay, hot.
No, you have to turn it. So you should get, and so here's where the work comes in. Everything worth having takes time and work, right? So to have a good bin, you have to get out there and turn it. To have a good garden, you need to get out there and weed it, right? And water it. Same thing. So I would recommend that you turn your bin every week to 2 weeks. I know. Life is hard sometimes. But you get such a sweet, lovely thing by doing this turning and by doing proper maintenance. And you get a nice little workout. So, the abdominals after these donuts could use a workout by going and turning your compost bin.
When you say turning, what do you mean by that?
That's a good question. So I've not brought my props today, unfortunately, but you're essentially taking your pitchfork, going in there, and turning it over. That's it. So you're trying to bring everything that's in your pile to the outside. So all the stuff that's been hot and cooking that's inside comes out, and everything that's outside of your pile goes in. So the things that are outside that have been exposed to the cold, say in the wintertime, they need a chance to heat up and break down too. So you're trying to move that inside of your pile. Alternatively, if wielding a pitchfork is too hard for you, you can invest in a compost crank. And these are devices that you can get, again, online. They're about $40 to $50. And they essentially look like a big corkscrew with a handle on top. And you turn it into your, I know, Ashley, it's looking weird, but you essentially turn it in like you're getting the cork out of a wine bottle, and then you pull up, and it brings up the stuff that is inside your pile to the outside, and you're just moving around and doing that over and over again. It's a great activity for children or grandchildren or neighborhood children to come over and do.
What are you saying that, do you recommend that more than the ones that help, turn? Because I looked at the website beforehand and there's
Yes. Yes, and that's an option that you have and one that we'll see outside. So you can get that does turn. And those are a lot easier if you find it too physically demanding to go out there with a pitchfork or compost crank. You can just turn it that way. But that too, you need to turn every 1 to 2 weeks. Make sure that you're paying attention to it.
But for you, do you think the pitchfork method is better?
Yeah, I believe more torture adds to more like improved product. Yes. Yes. But yeah, pick what's good for you. If you find that you have, limitations physically, then you're not going to go and build, a compost bin that you have to get into with a pitchfork or compost crank. You're going to probably want to invest in one of those tumbler styles.
To recover, but what you're saying almost like can be done outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Supposed to walk to the element of the air.
Yeah, so it can be exposed. No, it doesn't have to be, but what some folks do to try to keep the heat in their bin to help it cook is that they cover it with an old rug. So if you have an old tatty rug that is about to go into the trash, or if it's made out of natural material, even better, you can lay that on top of your pile to keep heat in. And eventually it'll decompose itself and eventually become part of the pile. But you can cover it if you like, but it's not necessary.
So how do we know that it's ready to put in the garden?
Good question. So if you have a compost thermometer, that's great. It'll tell you. So once it's heated up, right, that's one stage, or that's one sort of marker. When the temperature begins to come back down off of that bell curve, right, it's re-entered its mesophilic period. So you start to see the return of earthworms, flies, pill bugs, what I was describing. That's one way of knowing. You can measure it to see what's going on. But to your eye, it might not look like it's all cooked. You should be looking for something that is brown and crumbly. I think what I sent around, you should see some twigs in it, but you shouldn't see the food waste that you put in there. If you see the food objects that you put in, it still needs to cook some more, right? Yeah, so you should still keep turning it to make sure that heat gets up. If you realize that, you put your hand in or around it and it's very cold, and it stopped cooking, what people do is they add blood meal. So that's something that you can get from the store. Or you can add grass clippings. Again, that's high in nitrogen to help get it restarted. But you want to keep working on it. So one way, seeing what the temperature is. Way number 2, looking and seeing what the bugs are like or what you're seeing in your bin. Checking to see if you see any evidence of the food scraps they once were. But if everything is dark and brown, lovely, it's crumbly in your hand, and importantly, when you hold it up to your nose, it smells like forest floor, you're golden. And so at that point, if you have those metrics in front of you, you have earthworms, you have sweet smell, you have dark brown and crumbly, at that point, you can add it to your bin. Some people will say it should cure for a bit. I don't believe in that. Those people will leave it for 6 weeks or more just sitting there. And I think what a shame. As rain and things are hitting it, it's just going to waste. So I just add it at that point to my garden when it looks to my eye ready to go. And that's essentially how you do this. So we'll go to the next slide there. So you've done your homework, right? Things are going great in your bin. You've added 3 parts carbon to, what did I put, 1 part nitrogen up there. You have layered these things. You're turning every week. Your neighbor who is composting with you comes over and they say, can I add this to my bin? And they're a pile of weeds from the garden that they just cleaned out next door. And in the weeds that you see, there are seeds in it. Dun, dun, dun. You do not add that to your pile. And here's why. Even though your pile is heating up and getting things cooking, it's getting quite hot, it won't get hot enough to kill off some really pernicious weed seeds that pop up in different places. So I'm thinking of asters. I'm thinking, what else is really sort of goldenrod. Goldenrod's very pretty, but it comes up everywhere, right? It's not going to get killed off in your compost bin. So for those things, I would recommend, as I told you earlier, putting them in a bin and waiting until they stink and then using it as a compost tea. They might also bring over something that they cooked last night, right? So instead of fresh vegetable scraps, they're bringing over the remnants of a meal. That's a no-no, because usually when you're cooking things, you've added oil to it, it has a particular smell, there are other spices in it, and even though that will decompose, it's gonna attract vermin to your bin. And so that is a no-no, that stays out from your compost bin. Like we said, meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Eggshells are fine. You don't want what's in the egg to go into your bin. Now, I will say, if there's an instance where you have just a rando egg that cracked from the store, that one thing isn't going to make anything go bad. But if you're constantly getting into the habit of dumping eggs full on into your bin, I don't know why you would be doing that, but it's come up before, just don't. Just add the eggshell. Coal is not okay. Anything from your barbecue pit, again, using that manufactured, the briquettes, those won't go into your bin. No dog or cat waste. Chicken poop is okay, rabbit poop is okay. Those can help even speed up the composting process by adding some nitrogen to get things heated back up again. But dog and cat poo, absolutely not. Any yard waste treated by pesticides. So if you're into spraying your lawn to keep down on some problems, the grass clippings from that should just go into the yard waste bin. Let's see, and then of course plastic, especially that which is labeled compostable. There are a lot of companies now that want to be more sustainable, and they will use or give out compostable forks, knives, cups, plates. It doesn't break down in our composting unit, not in your backyard unit. It will only break down with the help of a digester or with lots and lots of time. And so don't use it in your home bin, or you will continue to see it pop up in your garden. Yes?
So now we know what goes in and not goes in there. I'm just trying to think of my own self, and I think she was saying, I'm gonna have a hard time getting browns. Do you have like a list somewhere or a Facebook group where they say, hey, go over to this place, they have, like that place we were saying that had the sawdust?
Mm-hmm.
I've already forgotten who that was.
Easy wood tools, but you know, that's a really good idea.
Of companies that say, hey, we can come over on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
On sawdust or
Yeah.
chipping or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you have some kind of list that where we can go and say, hey, I didn't surround?
You can come bring my own.
Yeah. So your leaves, one. Yeah, but Seth has just mentioned that with that idea is a good one.
Yeah, we don't currently have anything like that, but just from this and where we've gathered a few resources now, I think that we might be able to add a listing and a map onto the Lexington.gov/compost page. And hopefully
Yeah, and like contact information, talk to Sue at this place and she'll load you up with sawdust.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. You have a task. That's okay. So is this list pretty, I mean, it should cover everything that you might see at home. Yeah.
What about those tacky peanuts that are made out of cornstarch?
I don't know those. Do you? I've not heard of those, but are they purely cornstarch?
I think so. They'll dissolve in water.
I think that should be fine. Yeah. As long as it's their only ingredient, I can't see why.
I don't really know what's in them when they say they're cornstarch.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyone else?
One thing I've gotten added to doing with my eggshells is, as I use them, I'll then let them dry good in a warm oven, you know. And then crush them a little bit with my hands, put them in a Ziploc, and then after I collect a suitable amount, I'll then spread them out on the mat and crush them with like a rolling pin. Then put them in the container. They're fine, like almost like a coarse
It is
salt.
calcium.
Yeah.
Like coarse salt.
Yeah.
And then it just breaks it down fast.
You can actually cook out your food.
Yeah. And you know what you can also do? There's a fermentation cookbook, and it's, again, people who are looking at ferments to get different micronutrients into their garden. And one of their recipes is to use roasted eggshells And to add apple cider vinegar to it and keep it in a bottle, it creates a really fun scientific reaction. It fizzes everywhere. But if you leave it for a while, it somehow draws that calcium out of the eggshell in a liquid form that, again, plants can take up. So another way of using some of your eggshells. So yeah, that's great. Okay, alrighty. So I think that, oh, we have okay. Oh, no, we can skip that one. We talked about it. Yeah, and then we should go to the problem one. That one. Okay, so when you run into problems, and after this we'll take a break, I swear. So if it's smelly, again, you've gone to your bin, and most likely if it's smelly, you haven't been to your bin in a while. You know that one, you need to add more brown stuff to it, more carbon, and you need to turn your bin. So that's the solution for getting rid of the rotten smell that might also be accompanied by slime. If it's a little bit leaning in the ammonia direction, because that's one of the byproducts that come out, if you're smelling ammonia, you have too many greens and not enough browns. I rarely ever hear that problem. It's usually the reverse. Well, actually, it is too many greens, but it'll most likely be grass clippings. Just go ahead and get some wood chips. And if your pile doesn't heat up, one, it could be too small. So go to your neighbor and ask if they can add to your bin. See if you can get like a sort of a community group together on your street to just come and add to what you have. It might be insufficient moisture. So when you touch compost on a not rainy day, it should be damp. You should be able to squeeze it and your hands not be drenched in moisture or wetness, but it should just feel like a sponge that's been sitting on the edge of your sink for a while, right? Damp, but not sopping wet, just kind of nice to touch, really. So get a watering hose and just water your pile and then turn it to get moisture in. There's not enough air, and that's why it isn't decomposing, because again, oxygen is key to that process. So what do? You turn your pile, work. If it's cold and things have slowed down, like I said, you can add an old ratty rug to the top of it. It's all the better if it's made out of natural material that will then break down. You can put tarp over it if you like, or you can add some like robust nitrogen source. So if you have well broken down chicken poo or blood meal, that can be added to your pile to get things heated. Okay, and so with that, if there are no questions, oh, there is one.
There's a product you can buy, composter. What is that? Is that nitrogen or what is it?
I don't know that product, but I'm guessing, is it just to get your compost started? It might be just remains from a previous compost pile. So to get a new pile started, they often, people will go and get a little bit from a friend's pile, because it just adds like a nice bacterial boost to get things cooking in your pile. So don't buy it, just find a friend who's already doing it. It's like, kombucha, if you've done that, just go and get a SCOBY from someone. Yeah. Yes?
Is there any advantage to adding soil occasionally to it?
Yes.
Smaller amounts of, this soil.
From your garden soil? Yeah, no, that's fine. I would only say if there is an issue in your soil that is presenting a problem, like how sometimes there will be issues with garlic or potatoes, a kind of blight that kind of lives in the soil for a number of years. In that case, if again, if you're planning to plant potatoes or garlic anywhere you're putting compost, in those cases you might not want to mix in your soil. Otherwise, I don't see a problem with that.
I did see here earlier in the handout where old potting soil from old potted plants maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're worried about your soil, you can pasteurize it in your oven. So the same thing that you do with your eggshells. I wouldn't go above 120, but you can put it on a tray, pasteurize it, and that kills out pathogens, and then you can add it in.
Is pine cone any good? Or is this gooey?
Pine cone? Yeah, just break it up and add it in. Just note that pine material will add a bit of acidity to your compost pile, so that's the only thing to be aware of.
Is there a way to test how acidic it is?
Yeah, if you have access to a lab, but do you know of a way?
Basic pH tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you chop up everything that you put in the compost?
I tried to, again, for the reason that sawdust is so awesome, because it's been cut up, it increases the surface area so that bacteria just have more space to chew on. Yeah, with like loppers, or if you're okay with using your weed whacker as an immersion blender. So yeah.
Even peelings, like banana peels.
Yeah, chop it up.
Oranges, the orange peels you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's still debris.
Yeah.
Just accelerates the degradation.
Yeah, makes it go by a lot faster. I mean, some of you might have put a whole pumpkin in your, actually you will see some whole pumpkins in a compost pile that are taking forever to break down. And it should have been broken up, but that's okay, we'll work on it. Okay, we'll take a break, take a bathroom break, get some snacks, coffee, orange juice, and in about 10 minutes, we will go outside. These are the 3 models that we have and what you would typically find if you're looking for a composter. There's this Darth Vader system that is stationary. It's easy peasy, you just put it on the ground. To prevent critters from going into this, I would recommend getting pins. You can locate pins from Landscaper's Corner or from they should even have them at Lowe's or Home Depot. They're just like sort of, kind of like paper clips. That's the best way I can describe it. Only, they have 2 ends that you can just stick down into the ground, and that could prevent possums from lifting this up and knocking it over. Again, for the person who had issues with critters destroying.
That was me.
Oh, yeah, so they've chewed through
I have one
this.
very similar to that, and where those little holes are, the
Yeah.
vent holes, they just rip them apart and get inside.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've not seen that before. I mean, the only thing I can tell you is that you could try to go around it with more chicken wire, metal chicken wire, to create another barrier. It'll look ugly, but it might help.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and to the best of your ability, prevention with attracting them. So making sure you keep down smells, that you're turning, that you're making sure you're adding lots of carbon, and covering that. But this model is awesome if you don't want to, bug yourself with a pitchfork. You can use a compost crank in this one, like I described, to turn this, or you could just let it be a cold composting system. You layer in it until it's filled up, and you just leave it alone. And then in about a year's time or a few months, on one side, on this side, you should be able to pull up at the bottom, and at the very bottom is all the good stuff that is broken down over time that you can then scoop out and use to however you want to use it. And so the top of that material will go lower down, and you can begin adding to it again if you like. That's totally fine, but it's a super easy system. I mean, the downside is that it is plastic, but it works just fine.
But you still have to turn the material on, right?
So yes, you can with a compost crank if you want to do hot composting, or you can leave it like in a cold composting system that I was describing, where you're just throwing things into a pile. And at the end of a year and a half, you can pick this up and the stuff on the bottom should be good to go. So if you're really not physically into doing compost, but you want to do compost, this is one method that you can utilize. And again, you don't turn it, you just fill it up, leave it, make sure you're still adding carbon, and it should be fine.
Do you know where those are available for purchase?
I think Seth is going to talk a little bit about that. This is okay.
Oh,
Yeah. So this is the tumbler that some of you have seen or even have, and you can see that it has a clock and it has a plus sign on it. It rolls. You can grab it by the side and do it, or you can just push it. Very easy peasy. This comes out and it has 2 chambers. Nothing has been added to these in a very long time. But you can go and check out the 2 chambers and the plus sign, and simply when one side is filled up and you want to indicate that it is processing or cooking, you just flip the signs over and slip it back in to indicate the clock on this side and the plus sign on that side. So it's very easy, but it doesn't get the magic of all the creepy crawly bugs and worms that would come into an on-the-ground stationary system happening. So to get this started, I might add a little bit from an old compost pile or from a friend's pile into it to introduce some of the bacteria and some creepy crawlies. Yeah, because this is off the ground. Although it will still compost just fine, you still need to maintain all the practices of adding browns and turning. The plus sign is just saying add. That indicates to add more material, and the and the clock sign is cooking.
So you always have to add fresh stuff on the plus side.
Yes, and on the cooking side, you shouldn't be adding anything. You should have already added, as much as can fit.
Do the two chambers cross over?
There's a division inside, and there's also importantly air holes. So even though it's a tumbler off the ground, there are these air hole or vents on the side that can help you to control the amount of air going in, and there's little holes on the bottom as well.
Periodically take out the plus and dump it to the minus?
Well, when you're done, when you filled up the plus side, you will move that over into the cooking side, or not move it, you flip the sign. Yeah.
Get it out of there when it's done, though.
Just pour it out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't think there's a way to open this. Yeah. So you would just dump it out to the best of your ability, rock it out, and have something under there to catch it. I should also say that it's really good that it has those slats because liquid won't build up in this. You might need to drill additional holes in the center to just make sure that the liquid drains out. You don't want liquid building up in there because it'll just become soup. Okay, so that's the tumbler unit, and then this is the DIY home unit. So I built this, I think, 4 years ago, so this is how it's holding up with non-treated wood. It is the New Zealand composting system. I forget the name of the guy who did it, but the most interesting thing about this is that you can build this for about $150 with material from Home Depot. These 2x2s, they go, or I'm sorry, 1x1s, I think that's 1x1, 2x2s, thank you. It goes down into the ground and it's with a little point that sticks down, so it acts like a pin, only this isn't moving anywhere. And yeah, you can see there's vents along the side, and the front of this can be taken out to allow you to get in with your pitchfork. If you're wondering if I have a nice bin like this or a few bins like this at home, no, because the city gave me the money to go and buy it and build it. Otherwise, without money or the city's support, I just got some pallets together and knocked them together. So I have one pallet that's for recent material and one pallet that's sitting empty or would have cooking material in it. And that's the cheap girl's way of doing things. It's just going behind the liquor store, getting pallets and knocking them together. So, okay, any questions about any of those?
How long has that one been going, you said?
About 4 years. Because we've done 3 of these now and we skipped 1 year, so I think it's 4 years.
To get more brown stuff in it?
Well, they put lots of straw in it, they just haven't turned it. So, yeah.
There's things growing.
Are those pumpkins? Are those pumpkins
Yeah.
in there?
Uh-huh.
So if you just happen to have some big pumpkins in your compost pile, just maybe take a shovel and try to cut them up.
Yes, break them up. Absolutely. It's something that I'll have a chat with McConnell Springs about. But yes, at this point I would go in there with the shovel and just bust it up and turn it.
Are going to grow.
Yes.
I mean, things are growing now.
Yeah.
Just to share, I did have a compost pile that was working really well a long time ago in Dallas. And I bought a thing, because I'm not strong, where you push it in and you can pull it out, and it's got these little leaves that come out when you pull it.
Okay.
You can aerate it easily.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
It's not a corkscrew. So you just push it and pull, and it brings what's in
Yeah.
up. So and you can even stick it in at an angle. And
Yeah.
Anyway, I actually found it the other day. It's in my shed.
Okay, and what is it called?
I don't know what what it's called.
Okay.
It's just an aerator, a compost aerator.
We have a very similar tool for sale on the website.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
And that has a full, I think everything on there has a little video explaining how
Okay.
they work and things. So.
Okay, neat.
If you're not
Okay, that's a good tip. Thank you.
Mother Earth News, they have tools for doing stuff like that. I saw one that was a tea ambo
Yeah.
style.
Nice. Well, yeah, there's a lot of things to make this easier, so there's no excuses to not composting. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to leave you guys to look around for a few minutes, take 5, and then in 5 minutes I'll meet you back inside where we will quickly breeze through vermicomposting, and then Seth will tell you what to do next, and then we'll go home. Okay, so in front of you, there are 2 5-gallon buckets stacked into each other. One bucket on the bottom is entire, it has no holes in it. The bucket that is nested inside of that bucket has holes along the side and also holes at the bottom to release liquid. In it, I have, and unfortunately I can't unload the top one because my buckets have stuck together, which is unfortunate because I would really love that compost tea, but it's all good. In it, I have bananas, carrots, loads of coffee grounds, some little bits of office paper shredded up, and worms, and specifically red worms. So worms are really fascinating, really awesome. It's kind of an alien world. They are hermaphroditic. They don't have genders. They have sex by just like cuddling. You know, so they just rub up next to each other. Their bodies are slimy and oozy and goozy. They eat, I think, 1.5 times their own weight each day in food that you put into the spin. They're really just the loveliest little house pets that you can ask for. They're quiet. They keep their poop. Well, they eat their own poop, really. But, and they're quiet. They stay in the dark. They don't like light. This is something that you can put under your kitchen sink. It's something that you can put in your closet. And if you're doing well, it doesn't smell either. And so, really easy to maintain. The important thing when it comes to worms is to think, what is it that makes me comfortable? Because if I'm comfortable, my worms are comfortable. So if it's summertime and you're out in your garage and it's 80 degrees and you're just sweltering, well, forget about it. Your worms are dead, right? If you're in your house and your heating has gone out and it is, say, 20 or below or something like that, forget about it. Your worms are dead. If you have put in loads of citrus, and remember, worms do a lot through their skin. They breathe through their skin. They reproduce through their skin. And citrus has oils on it that are acidic. So if that, say, would be an irritant to you, it's going to be an irritant to your worms. So first rule is thinking about your comfort levels and transferring that over to your worms. That being said, you want to make sure that your worms stay in environments that are above 60 degrees. You want to make sure it does not go over 75 because they'll begin to swelter. You want to make sure they have damp bedding that they're living in, which we'll talk about. And you want to make sure that there is no liquid building up into the bucket where they live. And that liquid, it's a good thing. You're going to want to draw that off because it makes a wonderful compost tea, as we were talking about earlier, that you can apply to your houseplants. So it's a really rich substance that can help with really wonderful plant growth that can be used, and it's a benefit because you don't want your bugs drowning in it. So how do you do this? How do you get into the game of vermicomposting? And Ashley, because you were worming and squirming earlier, I'm coming to you. Okay. So I want everyone to leave here touching compost in their hand because this is how you learn what you're looking for. Here you go, put out your hands. There you go, there's a little buddy for you. And I want you guys to pass down your little worm piles to your buddies. You're gonna get a carrot there. A little worm for you. So feel it, smell it, look in it. It's the circle of life. See what you see in there. You might see mites, you might see worms, you might see gnats, which are normal. In the summertime, you will get a few too many gnats, and in that instance, you can put it in a shady spot in your yard for them to bug off. Haha, get it? Bug off. That's just coffee grounds there. Here you go. You've seen this before. I'm just going to give you crumbs. Yes. So now that you've touched and smelled, you've seen that it's not gross at all. Yeah, you can get a little snack out of there.
How long has this been in process?
So this has been a long time because I went on sabbatical for 3 months and the office forgot to feed them. So I was shocked to see they were still alive. But that meant I was a good owner and that they had, good bedding, they had, an adequate amount of food. Again, so they're neglectable. You just don't want to neglect them too much. So this has been going, I want to say, since June of last year without being harvested. And what I have done, and this is how you do, with your 5-gallon bucket, you want to get bedding material ready. You can use coconut coir. You can use office paper from your shredder. You want it to fill up probably about a third of this bucket. And you want to make sure that material is damp. So sometimes you can spray it with a spray bottle. You can dunk it in water. But at the end, you want it to be damp, not too wet, a lot like what your compost pile feels like. Remember, if you're doing everything through your skin, you don't want anything sharp or hard or abrasive. So that dampness makes it a lot easier and a lot more comfortable for your worms. Once that's done, we added about 250 grams of red wigglers to our bucket. And the reason why we have chosen red wigglers and not just anything out of the backyard is because red wigglers are worms that will eat organic waste. Not all worms do so. You can't just go and dig up a worm and hope that it'll do the same. Yes, there are many different worms in your compost bin if things are going well, but not all of those worms are efficient at breaking down your rubbish the way that red wigglers are. So you can get those specifically by ordering online, or you can go to, I was supposed to look it up before today. It's like Outdoors Backyard or they're on New Circle across from Sam's Club. And I'm going to remember and email it to you so that you can email it out to them. But they sell red wigglers routinely. So you can just stay in your own neighborhood, get some, and add them to your bin. And the wonderful thing about worms as well is they reproduce like crazy. And so before you know it, you will have so many worms that you will have no problem with getting your friends into vermicomposting as well, because you can give them some and they can start their own buckets. So you add your worms to your bed of coconut coir, of shredded paper, shredded newspaper, and for the first week or so, I wouldn't overwhelm them too much. I would just give them a banana peel or two and let them get to it and let them get settled into their homes. Once that is established, you can go forth with adding, uneaten carrots, like what you see here, coffee grounds from, 1 coffee serving, just small amounts. You don't want to say put a whole pumpkin in here because you will overwhelm the worms. They just won't be able to do that. But if you keep slowly adding regularly, making sure their bedding is moist, you will have a wonderful soil amendment for your house plants and your garden plants that will not smell and that will give you out of this world growing results. It's really neat stuff. So much so, in fact, that they sell worm castings now at garden centers, at your big box stores for loads of money, and here you can get it for free. So the next thing to think about is once these worms are eaten, once it looks like they've eaten most of the food in there, you're still going to see some, but they've eaten most of the food in there and their bedding has disappeared, what to do? That's when you harvest your worm castings, what we call worm poop, worm castings. Worms, again, you stop and you wait for them to burrow down. You might want to hill it like this to create a taller mass for, so the worms have more further down to go and you can get more. But you're essentially doing that. You're essentially skimming off the top and letting those worms burrow down. And so once you've gotten off all that you can, you put your worms into a new bin or, the same bin that's now tidy with fresh bedding. Again, office paper, newspaper, shredded, damp, and you start all over again. And that's it. Pardon? Yeah, so they, C-O-I-R. I-R. And it's really readily available at Home Depot or Lowe's or online. They use it now as to add to different soils, but also to do seed starting. It's really the brown coconut stringiness. Yeah. Oh, at pet stores as well.
You always start with the paper for bedding?
Yeah, the worms need bedding to be in. You can't just put them in without, because they like to burrow and they also reproduce in those burrows. Like they need space away from the food.
Would they go through the holes that you have at the bottom?
Sometimes they do, but they don't. Only when they're unhappy. So that's actually a good question, because what to look for when your bin is not going well. When your bin is not going well, it smells really bad, most likely because your worms are dead. If they're still alive, they will be sort of crawling up to the top en masse, or they'll be going through the holes, which is terrible because they'll drown. So they'll go through the holes to their death. So they're either going to die in the bin, and it's really sad when they die because they just go ghost. Like they're just not there anymore. Like if you see anything, you see outlines of their bodies that were once there, or they try to drown themselves. So if they're crawling out, that's bad. But they'll mostly want to stay in there because that's where the food is and the bedding.
So you keep talking about that it smells really bad. Well, like that bin out there, the wooden bin that was built out there, what would be like, if it smelled bad, what's the radius of the smell? You don't want it next to your house, you don't want it next to your neighbor's fence, right? I mean,
yeah.
You want it, say, 30 feet away from water or from something?
It won't smell that far away. If you're doing what you're, yeah, if you're walking by it, right, it's when you get a whiff of it. And that's going to be strong enough to attract vermin. Right. Yeah. If you're smelling it from, say, 30 feet away, you have a problem. You really, yeah. Yeah, no.
I wouldn't put anything like right up against a fence. The one I had in Dallas, I don't know if this is really, as I recall, it took the paint off of the garage, the side of the garage.
Really?
I think maybe it just rotted it.
Okay.
But, so I always wanted to keep it away,
yeah.
a couple feet away from a fence or anything that I wanted
to
preserve.
Yeah, good note. Anyone else? So yeah, it's super easy. Share your worms with your friends because it can get quite crowded in there. But that's really it to vermicomposting. And it's so easy that I really recommend that you all do it. And unlike me, you can invest in one of these shimmies. If you do the bucket way of doing this, there's like a shimmy that you can slide in there to get your buckets unstuck. I'm just too cheap. And I keep hoping that one day I can get it unstuck by my hands. But that is essentially vermicomposting in a nutshell. And if you do it well, you'll have your worms with you for a very long time. If you want something that looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, People build wormeries out of wood. There are plastic contraptions. I think you're going to talk about one that's stackable, so you could have a worm condominium. I mean, really, the sky's the limit when it comes to bug living quarters. So that is essentially it. I'm a little bit over time, but thank you so much for doing this. Please feel free to send pictures of what you do in your backyard to Christine@seedleaf.org. This has been lovely. Thank you so much.